Now we're going to continue our day with our first panel, who's going to focus on protection, management, and restoration of future forests. And to help us get this panel started, it's a pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Juha Uitto, who is the director of the Independent Evaluation Office of the Global Environment Facility. Juha?
Thank you, John, and good morning to everybody. This is a very tough act to follow, but so the good news is probably that we are just moving into a regular session here on the future of forests. We have three panelists here this morning, and I'm the moderator, so you don't have to listen to me very long time. So I would like to introduce each one of the panelists and invite them to come here and sit on stage. So let's start with Jessica Webb. Jessica is the civil society specialist for Global Forest Watch, which is a monitoring platform that promotes transparency by providing near real-time information on the state of forests globally. And it is managed by the World Resources Institute. Jessica leads efforts to ensure that civil society organizations around the world have access to the information and evidence they need to sustainably manage forests and promote accountability among decision makers. She also manages the Global Forest Watch Small Grants Fund, which offers financial and technical support to CSOs for innovative projects utilizing the platform. And Jessica has been working for a decade, you wouldn't believe it, but with international civil society organizations on issues including sustainability standards and certification, community conservation, and so forth. And she has a master's degree in environmental management from the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies at Yale, as well as a master's in international relations and environmental policy from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. Next, I would like to introduce Elizabeth Goldman, who also works with the Global Forest Watch. And she is a GIS research associate there. And she conducts geospatial analysis on global forest change data and supports the creation of a new data for Global Forest Watch, maps and research publications as well. And her own research focuses on Central Africa, where she studies forest change dynamics in the Congo Basin using spatial modeling and statistics. Liz holds a bachelor's degree in environmental science from Berkeley, California, and a master's of city planning from the University of Pennsylvania. And finally, Michael Mann. Michael is assistant professor of geography at George Washington University. He was educated at Boston University and has a PhD in geography. No surprise there, maybe. But Michael actually has a dual background. He's both an economist and an environmental geographer, and he uses spatial modeling for econometrics, environment, and remote sensing, and in general, computing in social science, arts, and humanities. So we have a very interesting panel here, and we are going to talk about forests from the point of view of largely from geospatial information, and you're in for some fun and games also, because this is not going to be your traditional lecture. Still, maybe I can take the opportunity of the privilege of the chair to bore you a little bit with what I am working on. So I'm with the Independent Evaluation Office of the GEF. Do I just? And the Global Environment Facilities, it's a, as you may know, it's a major funding source for global environmental issues, and it was established in the connection of the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio. And we fund basically projects in various areas that support the developing countries and countries with economies in transition to deal with issues such as climate change, biodiversity conservation, chemicals and waste management, land degradation, water. So it's a fairly large facility at the level of about $1 billion of funding per year. But of course, I mean, that may sound fairly large, but at the same time, think that we work in 165 countries in all of these areas, so it is actually not that much. So my job as the Director of Independent Evaluation is really in the interface between what Dr. Macklis was talking about this morning, being in between scientific evidence and policy making. We have an Intergovernmental Governing Council, and I report to them on the performance and organizational issues of the GEF, whether we are making an impact and so forth. And we base this information on fairly thorough research, which is really applied social science research in many ways, but we have to also communicate it very succinctly and clearly to the governments who fund us and who benefit from our funding. So it's really very much about applied social science research and communicating it clearly to policymakers. Now, I just wanted to very briefly, not to talk about it, but to show you that we have started using geospatial analysis quite much in our research and in our evaluation. And just a caveat there, it is not the only thing that we do, nor is GIS and geospatial analysis the only thing that geographers do either. But it is an important and a very useful tool. So, for example, we did a major evaluation on GEF support to protected areas and protected area systems around the world. So how did we use geospatial data? First of all, we were able to just to determine where have the funds gone. And this was as basic as it is, it was the first time anybody actually did this mapping of actually knowing where the biodiversity funding had gone. We also were able to then match it with the biodiversity hotspots around the world and see whether we are actually working where it matters most. We were able to do, going down in scale, we were able to do time series analysis using satellite data over 20 years and looking into the protected areas where GEF has funded work and other protected areas where others have done and looked in the protected areas and the surrounding landscapes into the trends, basically of land cover, land use, and forest cover. We did a thorough case study of Mexico, where there have been a lot of GEF-funded investment over the past 25 years. And we used geospatial information to layer different variables to analyze really what were the factors that affected conservation effectiveness. And we went down in a case study of Yucatan, where there has been a lot of investment into 30-meter resolution to see what was actually happening in the protected areas. And we found, you can't see probably, but in the top picture, we were able to find that there were actually cattle pens that had been established in the middle of the protected areas. So these are just examples of how we have been starting to use geospatial analysis for our evaluations, and it has been very, very useful. There are certain challenges, but at the same time, it has been worth the investment, I think. Okay, so I'm taking already far too much time, so I will thank you for your attention on this, and I think that Jessica and Liz will start with their presentation now. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Liz Goldman, and I'm here with my colleague Jessica Webb from Global Forest Watch and the World Resources Institute. And we're here today to talk to you about the future of our forests, and specifically how we see technology and the democratization of data shaping the future of our forests. Forests are incredibly important for the future of our planet and human beings in so many ways. Forests are the lungs of our Earth, essential for climate change mitigation and adaptation. Future forests that are sustainably managed can lead not only to healthy ecosystems and communities, but also an enhanced ability for these forests to absorb and store carbon. Future forests will not only harbor biodiversity, but will promote sustainable agriculture by regulating water and stabilizing our climate. In fact, forests are essential for food security and the livelihoods of millions of people. The forests of our future will provide for communities by offering food, shelter, energy, creating incomes and supporting communities who live in and around these forests. For these reasons, they're especially important for rural populations, which include some of the world's poorest people who rely on forests for their subsistence. Despite their importance, 50 soccer fields worth of forests are being lost every minute of every single day. Agriculture is still the most significant driver of global deforestation, and with the challenge of feeding 9 billion people by the year 2050, there's an urgent need to sustainably manage both our forests and our agricultural lands. We're at this critical juncture where we need to curb increasing trends of deforestation and sustainably manage our landscapes for future generations. Now, in the past, when we needed information to understand how forests are changing, we were forced to rely on reports like these and other static sources of information. Now, it takes a long time to create a report like this, so often information are years out of date, and they're scattered across different reports, and they're not easily comparable to one another. Enter Global Forest Watch, which is a platform aimed at filling this need for timely and actionable information, bridging the gap between data and decision-making. We connect cutting-edge science and technology with forest stakeholders and decision-makers at all levels around the world. And importantly, we seek to do this in a way that makes it incredibly easy for people to understand the data, draw relevant insights, and take action. We want to drastically reduce the time, effort, and costs it takes for people to access forest data. So here's our Forest Watch platform, and specifically the interactive map portion of the platform. And in green, we have forest extent as of the year 2000, and in pink, we have forest loss. Global layers like this are really important. They help us see the forest through the trees. Now I'm going to hand it off to Jessica, who's going to lead us in an exercise to demonstrate the impact that global layers can have.
Okay, so if you'll bear with us, we're going to try to do a new and experimental thing. We're going to do a human data visualization and representation of the Global Forest Watch platform. So as Juha mentioned, we're going to do a couple interactive sessions during this forest panel. So on your table, you'll see 2 piles of paper. One has dice on them. Ignore that for now. That will be in Michael's presentation later. But you'll see another pile that has at least 1 green piece of paper on the top. So please distribute those around your table. Most of the paper will be green, but some of the paper will be pink. And when you're ready, hold them up in front of you, like this. Okay. And meanwhile, Liz is going to take a picture of this so we can tweet it out later, so make sure to look at the Twitter. So on the Global Forest Watch platform, as Liz explained, the green pixels represent forest cover, and the pink pixels represent deforestation. So look around you and point to the person closest to you that has a pink pixel. Okay, so it took you a minute, right? Some of you were right near people with pink pixels, or maybe even had one yourself. But many other people with green pixels, especially in the middle, it took you a little bit to try to figure out where the pink pixels were. However, from our point of view, from the eyes in the sky, right, from the satellites, we could see immediately from where we were where the pink pixels were. So thank you very much. You can put the papers down or take them home as a souvenir. Okay, so we're going to take you on a series of journeys to the 3 of the most important forested areas and ecosystems in the world. And first, we'll be traveling to the Amazon Basin. As many of you know, the Amazon is the largest forested ecosystem in the world, larger than the second 2, the Congo Basin and Indonesia combined, actually. And within the Amazon Basin, there are over 16,000 tree species and an estimated 390 billion individual trees. And as I'm sure we all know, people have been living in the Amazon forest for over 5 millennia. And it's estimated that throughout these thousands of years of time, up to 12% of the entire Amazon has been impacted at one point or another by human management. However, because of indigenous peoples and forest-dependent communities have had many generations of experience in learning how to work with the ecosystem and sustainably manage natural resources, they've benefited from the experience and been able to sustainably harvest natural resources without depleting the supplies for the most part. Okay. And we can see this actually evidenced in this image in which the blue polygons represent indigenous lands in Brazil, officially recognized lands. The pink pixels, again, around them represent encroaching deforestation, which since the 1970s, there's been over 289,000 square miles of deforestation, primarily due to cattle ranching in the Amazon. And then we see that the blue polygons give away to dark green areas, which are intact forest landscapes that are surrounded by light green areas, which represent degraded forests. So studies have shown that indigenous people in forest-dependent communities, when given secure land tenure rights, are excellent stewards and regulators and managers of forests. And here we can see a zoom in of an image of the stark contrast between the forested areas and areas that have been clear-cut. So on the Global Forest Watch platform, in conjunction with our partners at the University of Maryland, we've now made available weekly deforestation alerts, which are 30 by 30 meter resolution. And this kind of real-time information allows both forest communities and governments to be able to respond rapidly to deforestation events as they're occurring. So you can see in this image with the pink pixels represent logging roads that are snaking through the Peruvian Amazon near the Ucayali River, which were created by illegal loggers to extract timber and bring them onto river barges on the river. So the algorithm and visualization on the Global Forest Watch platform enables users of this information to see where and when forest loss is happening and react to it in near real time. And, but the question then remains how to get this information into the hands of the people who can use it most. So Global Forest Watch, we're working with a number of civil society organizations in order to bring this information and put it in the hands of people who can do something about the deforestation events that are occurring. So we are working with the Jane Goodall Institute and developing a mobile app which brings these alerts offline and into the field through mobile devices such as phones or tablets. And then working with other groups such as the Amazon Conservation Team in the image here to train communities and how to use the device, go out, navigate to the alerts, collect information and evidence, and then bring that back and upload it and share it with authorities so that action can be taken. In another example, another partner of ours, Proyecto Monotocon, also in Peru, is using acoustic sensors. They look at Global Forest Watch data and alerts to figure out where to place the sensors. And then the sensors record sounds and information such as chainsaw noise or also gunshot sounds so that they're able to, again, track and immediately respond to illegal activity that might be happening. And finally, we're working with a number of partners who are using drones to go out and investigate alerts where they're occurring. And this is useful both for accessing difficult to reach areas and also helps to minimize some of the security risks of sending communities out to confront armed loggers in person. Okay, so now I'm going to hand it back over to Liz for our next journey.
Great, thank you. So from the Amazon Basin, we move to the Congo Basin, specifically the Democratic Republic of the Congo, or DRC. Forests in this part of the world are changing rapidly, and we're harnessing new emerging technology, which allows us to project where we think future forest loss is going to occur. But in order to do this, we first need to understand what's driving change in these forests. Well, in this part of the world, we know that a major driver of deforestation is clearing of wood for fuel. Wood fuel and charcoal production are important sources of energy and also contribute to the livelihood of people who are involved in the supply chain of this energy source. And in fact, around 90% of households in the DRC use firewood or charcoal primarily for cooking, but also for heating their homes. Another driver of deforestation in this part of the world is Swidden Agriculture, which is a type of rotational farming in which land is cleared for cultivation and then left to regrow for a number of years. And then finally, artisanal logging and commercial logging, mining, and roads, which allow access into otherwise remote forests, also drive deforestation. By understanding these drivers and their spatial location, we're able to capitalize on advances in the field of machine learning and understand where future deforestation is likely to occur. Now, machine learning is a type of artificial intelligence, and this field examines the construction of algorithms which can learn and make predictions from data. This is a simplified diagram, but it's one of a neural network, which is a type of machine learning and is modeled off the structure and functional aspects of biological neural networks. Our team is using this type of technology to explore the complex interactions among input layers, or in our case, deforestation driver variables, and make connections with where we think future forest loss is likely to occur. So let's bring us from these abstract models and back into the real world. Going back to DRC, we're using this technology to better understand future deforestation. And here in yellow, we have priority conservation landscapes, which are part of the CARPE program, which is a USAID-funded program created to conserve areas of biological significance and resiliency. And at this point, we've created models for all of the landscapes in DRC, but I want to just focus on the three in the eastern part of the country for this presentation. So we have our three CARPE landscapes, one of which includes Virunga National Park, Africa's oldest national park and home to incredible biodiversity, including 200 of the world's remaining 880 mountain gorillas. Now we know the location of forests in this area, which is shown in green on this map. And we also know where loss occurred, forest loss occurred in the last 14 years, which is shown in pink. And then areas in tan weren't forested as of the year 2000. So given all of the known drivers in this region, including distance to roads, to settlements, elevation, slope, and others, we can use all of this information to project future forest loss in these priority conservation landscapes, which brings us to the year 2020. So and I'll flip back and forth a little bit so you can see. So we can see increasing levels of pink in this map, right? So here's the year 2020. And we know that by this year, or we think that by this year, 613,000 hectares of forest will be lost in these conservation landscapes, and 315 megatons of CO2 emissions will result from that forest loss. So we've done the relatively easy part of creating these models, right? But I think the actual hard part will be making this information actionable and getting it to people who can actually do something in these landscapes. To start this process, WRI is planning a workshop in Kinshasa where we'll be presenting this work to Carpe landscape leaders and getting their input and trying to get them involved in future iterations of this project. Now, machine learning and predictive work they're really exciting topics, but I think it's important to remember that these are just models, and every model is wrong, but some are useful, right? So this type of modeling will only become more sophisticated in the years and decades to come, but I think where we really have our work cut out for us is to ensure that this information is actionable and actually translates into better land use decisions on the ground.
All right, and so we've heard about trying to connect real-time data and information to the eyes on the sky with the eyes on the ground, and we've also heard about predictive modeling and artificial intelligence as a future of forests. And the last area that I'd like to mention on our journey is we'll travel to Indonesia to talk about the fires that occur now on a yearly basis for the clearing of land for agriculture, particularly for oil palm and pulp and paper concessions and activities. And the forest fires and resulting haze in Indonesia, mostly in the islands of Sumatra and Kalimantan, are created through these slash and burn methods because it's the cheapest and easiest way to clear forests to make way for agricultural commodities. However, even though these fires have been outlawed for a number of years, they continue to occur on an annual basis. And last year was a particularly bad year for fires because El Nino conditions exacerbated the effects of the fires, which resulted in costs to the Indonesian government of about $16 billion, which was over double what it cost the government to invest in the 2004 tsunami recovery. And this is equivalent to about 2% of the country's GDP. And it also has striking impacts for climate change. Though the US economy is 20 times the size of Indonesia, for several months last year, emissions that stemmed just from the fires in Indonesia equaled the daily emissions of the entire US for several months out of last year. And the toxic haze also has very detrimental health effects on Indonesians as well as their neighbors in Malaysia and Singapore. During the fire season, schools closed. An estimated 500,000 people suffered from acute respiratory illness, and tens of thousands of people were thought to have suffered from premature deaths due to the effects of the fire. So high-resolution satellite imagery, like the image depicted here, of burn scars and active fires can help to ground truth and show where fires are occurring and who might be responsible based on who, when coupled with concession data, who owns the land. And this information is essential for emergency response and risk and damage assessment. This imagery is provided to Global Forest Watch users free of charge through a partnership that Global Forest Watch and our parent organization, the World Resources Institute, have with Digital Globe. And this is the Global Forest Watch Fires platform. It's a sister site to the main Global Forest Watch platform that Liz showed earlier. And on the platform, users can turn on NASA's VIIRS fire alerts to be able to see where fires are likely occurring. And this is updated twice a day, so near real time. And then also use the Digital Globe imagery, which is depicted in terms of availability in the red outlined footprints that are shown in this image, to be able to investigate further and get more information about the fires and why they're occurring and how to respond to them. So because pregnant women, children, and the elderly are most affected by the fires, groups like the NGO, the Women Research Institute in Indonesia, are using Global Forest Watch data and information about fire alerts and imagery to be able to empower women and civil society organizations in Indonesia to conduct evidence-based advocacy to promote greater transparency for forest concessions. And as a result of the trainings, women in 2 districts were better able to influence decision-making at the district and provincial level, and were able to advocate for an increase in health services. Okay, and I'll pass it back to Liz to wrap up.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, so just to wrap up our session, we thought we would pose a few questions to you to think about throughout the day. Potentially, we'll have time to discuss these at the end of the presentations, but we wanted to pose to you, how do you get data and tools into the hands of people who need them most? How do we ensure equal access for data and technology users while also ensuring financial sustainability for data and tech providers? They need to be able to, earn a living so that they can keep providing it, but we also need to make sure that people have access to this data. What's the next emerging technology to revolutionize the way we monitor forests? And finally, how do we make forests relevant to everyone? And with that, we'll end our session. And if you have any questions or want to get in touch with us, those are our email addresses. Thank you.
All right, great. So thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to be here. So I'm going to be talking to you today about wildfire and getting what you pay for. Essentially, as we all know, there's perfect conditions for wildfire throughout the West. With climate change, it's going to become increasingly more common. And that's kind of baked in, right? That's just the reality. What I want to do is I want to try to reframe this discussion and start thinking about this not as just a climate and a plant issue, but as an economic issue. Okay, so basically my argument here is that the last 50 years of economic incentives has radically changed the landscape, the ecosystems of the West, and has radically changed the way that humans interact with that environment and intermingle with natural communities. So let's take a look at some statistics that we should know. So the first thing to know, maybe I should stand in front of this so I can turn my head. So in California, 85% of wildfires are started by humans, right? So you're talking about all kinds of things about construction sites. You're talking about illegal campfires. Here we have an example of the Rim Fire in 2013. So the 3rd largest fire on record in California, 257,000 acres burned. And you can see that fire perimeter here, and you can basically stuff San Francisco inside of that fire perimeter, right? Enormous fires, high-intensity fires. Next thing to know is that on a bad fire year, California will spend $1 billion on fire suppression, right? The Forest Service is basically stuck spending almost their entire budget on putting out fires throughout the West and particularly in California. So the Rim Fire costs $127 million. There's 10 injuries. It burned 112 buildings. So let's just take a look at sort of the trends here. So we have acres burned over time, starting back in the 80s. And assuming that the climate continues to warm and to dry, we can expect this sort of pattern to continue out into the future, basically until fuels are exhausted. Is this a scary picture? Yes? Yeah, it's kind of a scary picture, right? It's like fire is like the shark of the land, right? We have a fire-nado here, right? We're all terrified of fire. So let's take a little journey back in time. So let's look back at 1800s, pre-colonial times. Acres burned in California alone on an annual basis, 6 million acres. We are currently at 6% of the acres burned compared to these pre-colonial times. Okay, so what's going on with that? Essentially, in California, low-intensity fires are a natural part of the ecosystem. Okay, this is an important thing that shaped all these exotic and diverse species and plant communities and ecosystems in California, and we've basically removed that from the system. Let's look at landscapes. I'm actually a modeler, so it's a rare thing when I put a photo up on a slide. And this is a great one. So this is Bear Creek Station in Sierra Nevada, 1915. About 30 to 60 trees per acre. Fuel loads about 10 tons per acre. Right? You can actually see the horizon. Pretty amazing. I don't know if you guys have been there recently, but it would look something like this. So a radical transformation of the landscape. We have temporarily removed fire from this ecosystem, a component of the ecosystem that is necessary to manage it. And as a result, we end up with an almost unmanageable problem. Now we have 4 times as many fuels on the ground. All of a sudden, fires are bigger, more intense, more dangerous, harder to control, expensive to control. You get the point, right? Does that make sense? So we all have this amazing idea that somehow we can spend our way out of this, right? We say, okay, fires keep going up, we'll just suppress more. We'll get tankers, we'll throw technology at it, we'll throw all of the latest and greatest things we can do. But the point is, you can't do this anymore. We'd spend as much as we could. We're at a one-to-one relationship now between acres burned and the amount of money that we spend. And the amount of acres burned just goes up and up and up and up and up and up. So this has to stop. This is a ridiculous task. I'm going to sort of, given the first talk today, hopefully I won't seem like a right-wing nut, but I want you to start thinking about suppression, not in terms of just costs that we have to do, but I think we need to start thinking about this in terms of subsidizing things that we want. So when you take Econ 101, first thing you learn is you subsidize those things you want more of, and you tax those things that you want less of, right? Carbon tax, great idea. Who knows why we don't do it? Yeah. Okay, so what has fire suppression bought us? Basically, what it has done is, I'm going to sort of flip my notes here. So basically, we've seen an increase in the number and the size of fires because of these subsidies directly. Right? We've increased those quantities of fuels. We've also increased the number and the success of ignitions by basically promoting people to live in these areas. We've encouraged short-sighted development, so we've made it way too cheap to live in high-risk areas. Way too cheap. And then finally, as a result, we've increased the costs and the risks to wildfire in general. Right? And the thing to remember here is that humans are 100% responsible for the risks that we face. 100% responsible. Because if people don't live there, there are no risks to humans, and we don't have to put out the fires. Okay? And that's an important piece. So if what we want is more fuels and more houses to protect, we've done a great job promoting that. Okay, so I actually hate talking, especially in front of large groups. So we are going to play a game instead of listening to me. You guys have really messy tables. If you could go ahead and clean off some of the garbage you've produced this morning, that would be great. No offense to anybody. I want you to grab a dice, one of those die in front of you. Hand those out. And this is a game, a variation of a game that I play in my natural hazards class. I've never played it at this scale before or with adults, so I have no idea how this is going to go. Just play along with me and we'll find out. Okay, so here's the scenario. You buy your dream home near Lake Tahoe, and you're sort of saving up for your children's education on the side, trying to make ends meet. Your neighbor is a typical single guy. Okay, he's a little reckless. He likes to have fun. You know, he likes outdoor recreation and gets, yeah, maybe a little too drunk sometimes. Okay, so the way that this is going to work is we're going to roll our dice once. Okay, we're going to roll it, and if you get a 4 or less, you're going to have a fire ignites near you. Okay? Hold on, guys. Calm down. Calm down. Okay, so if you get a 4 or less, there's an ignition. If you get an ignition, right, only if you have an ignition, then you get to roll for damages. Okay, so if there's, on that second roll, if you had a fire, if you roll a 3 or less, then your home burns. Okay? So, the last step here is we're gonna, if your fire does burn, you're gonna call for help, okay? If your home does burn, you're gonna call for help. Okay, so let's just give it one test round here. So roll your dice once. If you roll a 4 or less, you had an ignition. Now roll the second time. Only if you had an ignition, roll the second time. If you have a 3 or less, you get a fire, and you're going to hold up your card for help. Okay, great. All right, so we are ready to play round one. Round one, here we go. Okay, so your neighbor gets out his flame-throwing lawnmower, and he starts taking pot shots with his gun at neighboring rocks. You know, he's like an ignition machine. He's going nuts. So roll that die. If you had a 4 or less, there is an ignition. All right, so if there is an ignition, that fire starts rapidly approaching your house. It's rapidly approaching your house. So the firefighters mobilize. They get out. They risk their lives and their limbs, and they attempt to put out the fire. So roll that a second time. Only if you had an ignition. Only if you had an ignition. So, step 3. Unfortunately, some of you guys had homes burning. Raise your card if your home burned. Okay. So that's really tragic. That's rough. So keep those up. Keep those up. So I want you guys to look around. Take a look around you. Are you in a high or low risk area? Are you in a high or low risk area? Okay. Interesting stuff. Oh, hey, this just came in, guys. There's some good news. State of emergency was called. FEMA is covering the bill for pretty much everybody, and your insurance is going to help you rebuild your home. Bonus. Yay. All right. Great. So what I want you guys to do now, you can put down the cards. You can put down the cards. What I want you to do now is I want you to stand up. If you are willing to, I want you to literally get out $1. You guys all have cash, right? If not, take credit cards. Oh, wow. Jesus, what just happened? All right, here we go. Okay. So if you are willing to move to one of these low-risk areas, I want you to stand up, and I want you to put $1 on the table for me. Okay, we got 1 taker, 2 takers. Okay, great. All right, so put $1 on the table. You can move to a low-risk area. Oh, wait. So, let's go to round 2. Round 2, guys. You guys ready? All right, get those dice out again. Your neighbor hosts a really unruly Boy Scout outing in his backyard, right? How many of you guys were Boy Scouts? How many of you guys lit things on fire while you were Boy Scouts? Yeah, okay, that's kind of the idea, I think. Okay, so roll that die, roll that die. If you get a 4 or less, you had an ignition. 4 or less, you have an ignition. So, oh my God, we have ignitions, right? But, we've done this before. We're getting resilient, right? And, those of you that live in low probability areas, you're not really affected, so that's great. But once again, the firefighters are out, right? They're trying to put out those ignitions in your neighborhoods, risking their lives, spending money. So roll that again. If you get a 3 or less, your home's going to burn. So hold up your card. Hold up your card. Okay. So guys, I have some bad news for you. FEMA is only going to cover about 25% of the bill this time. And a lot of insurance companies, they don't operate in the high-risk areas anymore. Sorry, that sucks for you. So, how do you know whether you're in a high-risk or a low-risk area? High risk, you have a 6-sided die or less. There's actually some 4-sided die out of there for those of you that were courageous and grabbed that. If you're in a low-risk area, you have something that looks more like this. Okay, so this is asymmetric information at its best, right? So some people have the multi-sided die, some just have the 6 or less. So what I want you guys to do is if you're in a high-risk area, I want you to shell out $5 under the table, please. What, you think I'm joking? Like, get out a credit card, put something on the table for me, please. If you're in a low-risk area, you got to cover some of the state's costs, so I want you to put $2 out. If not, if you don't have cash on you, that's totally fine. I have a PayPal account. So just tally things up, figure out how much you owe me. I think, just put it MMANN 1123, and yeah, you should be able to send me the money. Okay, so now, same cost for $1. How many of you guys would be willing to move to a low-risk area? Stand up, stand up. You got 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so, do you guys get the point of that game? Was that fun? Lost the dollar, okay. Okay, so, it's sort of a ridiculous game, right? There's a clear incentive scheme that's a little bit ridiculous. But my argument here is that incentives matter. Because we made it cheap and low risk to live in what is essentially high-risk wildfire areas, right? We've encouraged development in really ridiculous places. And we've encouraged really poorly thought out development, like this lovely log home in the middle of an area that burns about every 10 to 15 years. So we've done sort of ridiculous, we've set up in a ridiculous incentive scheme. So typically what I do in these is we have some time to reflect, we talk back and forth with the students and sort of see what they got out of the game, but we don't really have time for that. What I did do is I put together a little document online. So if you go to tinyurl.com, wildfire discussion with capital W and capital D, you guys can type in whatever it is you think about me and my ideas, whether you think I'm an idiot or not. It's totally fine. I don't blame you. So, go on, log on. I know how much we all love to sort of have something to do during these talks, so please log on. Give me your 2 cents. Let people know what you think. So the takeaway message is this. Right, so I am actually a modeler, and my models are showing that there's basically going to be exponential growth in damages in California moving out to 2050. Okay? And almost all of that, almost every dollar here, is because of exurban development in high-risk areas. Right? The little dips up and down, there's your climate. This is driven by where people live. And despite knowing this, and this seems readily obvious to folks that work in this field, right? 40% of all new homes in California are in these high-risk areas on the wildland-urban interface. And my argument is that it's because we subsidize those things that make us most vulnerable. So that's what I got for you guys today. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony Cordero, Spatial Network. So, question about the last presentation here with the fire. So, from a modeling standpoint, right, if fire is the shark of the forest, can the modeling that you've been doing apply to floodplains and floods? Because the same thing exists. So, if fires are the sharks of the forest, then floods are the megalodons of the floodplains.
Absolutely, yeah. And I actually had a slide in there, and I was thinking about time, I took it out. One of the interesting things with the flood insurance is that 30% of all of the costs of the National Flood Insurance Program goes to 1% of the households that have recurring losses. So 30% of the cost to 1% of the households, because we just do this over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. So, I mean, maybe this is a little bit flippant, but the way that I sort of think about this is that there's sort of there's a fine line between resilience and stupidity. Sorry, yeah, I mean, that's blunt, maybe too blunt for this audience, But we need to think hard about what we want to support and what makes sense to support, right? If there's a critical reason people should be in these floodplains, let's say, farming is really important for the U.S., so that seems like a reasonable thing to promote and to fund. But if you're talking about mansions in the hills around Los Angeles, I think that there's a pretty, there isn't much of an argument for why nationally we should be subsidizing that behavior.
Okay, please. Oh yeah, first and then, yeah, please. First.
Two short issues. What are your opinions and thoughts on controlled burns? I've seen both good and bad out of that. In particular, yes, you have a lot of fuel, but I have also noticed that in some cases we guess horribly wrong with regard to what we do, and it makes some of the pictures that were shown earlier look like novelty. Point number two is there any way to go ahead and incorporate another major criminal of this, which happens to be disease? We have lots of trees that die from bark beetles and other kinds of natural predators, and it's not all just chainsaws and fire, but we have major components in disease. I will tell you that you will have a hard time taking a picture of Mount Rushmore without having bark beetle trees in the background.
No, those are two really good points. And I'm a modeler, so I get to sort of, hands off on that maybe to a certain degree. But certainly I think that in terms of controlled burns, we're not doing enough of it. And I think that we're all terrified of fire, and I get that. It's a risky, sort of scary thing. But in the end, what it comes down to is those fuels need to go. We're either going to try to do it in a controlled way, or we're going to do it in this sort of erratic, chaotic way. Those fuels are going to go eventually. So my argument would be we should do it in the most controlled way that we possibly can. In terms of disease, it's a huge factor, right? And with climate change, you have this sort of, real evolution of forests in the western United States. I've seen it myself. It's pretty terrifying, biking through a dead forest. And I don't know what the answer is, right? It's either got to be cut down and removed, or it's got to be burned eventually. It's just going to happen.
Okay, one final question, and then we'll
my
close.
question similar to that is just that I think missing from your model is the cost of proactive work, of selective cutting, burning, getting people to clear out
Absolutely.
Around where they live. And I just think your model's a little incomplete, that's all.
Okay, well, I didn't actually discuss the model at all today. But I mean, I set up this sort of ridiculous scenario for us to reflect on the incentive structures. No, I mean, you're right in that there's a lot of things that can happen, that do happen, that are sort of hard to incorporate in models. But I actually do incorporate all of the sort of the proactive fire burning that does happen in California in my models. The problem is it's actually very minimal.
Lisa,
Yeah, absolutely. The cost would be less. I absolutely agree.
Lisa and Jessica, any final thoughts?
I have lots of thoughts, but yeah, no, I think in the context of this discussion and just our different approaches to looking at the impacts on forests globally is that forests are one of like the great kind of conveners, in that they affect food, they affect health, they affect clean water, anti-erosion, food security, shelter, and then of course climate change. Not to mention biodiversity, which is of varying degrees of importance to different people. But once species go extinct, that's it. We can't get them back. So I encourage people to think about forests not as like a niche interest, but how it affects all the different elements of the sustainability and the Sustainable Development Goals and all of the work that we're doing in those areas, and how forests play an important part of that, because I feel like sometimes they're left out of that discussion.
Thanks very much. It's been a great pleasure to moderate such a lively session. So thank you, everybody. And